the city that vanished overnight. The mystery of Cahokia. The Mississippi River drifts silently beneath the morning mist. Beyond the skyline of modern St. Louis, a series of strange, grassy hills rise from the earth, symmetrical, deliberate, and ancient. They look like nature's work, but they're not. They're man-made monuments, each built basket by basket, from millions of loads of soil. 1,000 years ago, this place was not silent. It was alive, the beating heart of a civilization larger than London, filled with temples, markets, and tens of thousands of people. Its name was Cahokia, America's first forgotten city. Between the years 1050 and 1350 CE, this city stood as the largest and most complex urban center north of Mexico. At its height, more than 20,000 people may have lived here, with thousands more in surrounding towns. Its people built more than 120 earthen mounds, perfectly aligned with the stars and the sun. And then, as suddenly as it rose, the city vanished, leaving behind only grass-covered pyramids and unanswered questions. Cahokia's story begins with a mystery. How did a civilization without writing, metal tools or draft animals build one of the largest cities of the ancient world? And what made it disappear so completely that by the time Europeans arrived, almost no one remembered it had ever existed? To find the answers, we must go back 1,000 years, to the fertile plains where the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers meet. This land was a paradise of abundance. The rivers flooded every spring, leaving behind rich black soil. Deer roamed the forests, fish filled the channels, and the air buzzed with life. For centuries, small farming villages dotted the landscape. Families grew maize, beans, and squash, the crops that fueled Native America. But around the year 1050, something extraordinary happened. Villages joined together. Farmers became builders, and in the span of just a few decades, a massive city appeared almost overnight. Archaeologists call this sudden explosion of construction the Cahokia Big Bang. It was one of the fastest urbanizations in human history. At its center stood Monk's Mound, the largest earthen pyramid ever built in North America, 100 feet tall, covering nearly 14 acres. Atop it stood a grand temple, or the home of a powerful chief, visible for miles across the plains. Below, a vast open space known as the Grand Plaza stretched nearly 50 acres wide, an engineered field flattened by hand, where thousands gathered for ceremonies, festivals, and games. Everything in Cahokia followed a plan. The mounds, the plazas, and the neighborhoods were arranged on a perfect north-south, east-west grid, a city built as a reflection of the cosmos. To its people, this alignment was sacred. Every structure, every ritual, every gathering was a dialogue between earth and sky. On the western edge of the city stood something even more astonishing, a circle of tall wooden posts, known today as Woodhenge. Each post marked the position of the sun during solstices and equinoxes. At dawn, priests would stand in the center and watch the sun rise between the posts, announcing the change of seasons and the timing of planting and harvest. It was a calendar carved not in stone, but in wood and light. Cahokia's citizens lived in neat rows of thatched houses built around courtyards. Their homes were made from wooden frames packed with clay and grass. They cooked corn and beans in clay pots, stored grain in underground pits, and gathered each evening around shared fires. Children played near the mounds, while elders passed down stories of creation, balance, and renewal. The people of Cahokia were not isolated. They traded far and wide. Copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf Coast, and mica from the Appalachian Mountains all found their way here. These goods weren't just luxury items. They carried spiritual power. Copper gleamed like the sun. Shells echoed the voices of water spirits. To possess them was to hold pieces of the sacred world. In the heart of the city, life was ruled by ceremony. Every festival was a performance that bound thousands together, feasts, processions, music, and games. One of these games was called Chunky. Players rolled a smooth stone disc across the plaza, while opponents hurled spears toward its path, betting everything on where it would stop. It wasn't just sport. It was ritual, a symbol of fate and order, played under the gaze of the mounds and the gods. Cahokia was a city of layers, physical, spiritual, and social. At the top stood powerful chiefs and priests who claimed divine authority. Below them were artisans, farmers, traders, and laborers who kept the city alive. They built the mounds, tended the fields, crafted pottery and jewelry, and ensured that every ritual could unfold in perfect rhythm. But what made them come here in the first place? Why did so many people leave their villages to build this city? Archaeologists believe a new religious movement swept across the Mississippi Valley, a vision that promised renewal, order, and prosperity if the people united. The leaders of Cahokia may have claimed a connection to the gods, convincing thousands that the city was the center of the universe, the place where the earth met the sky. And so, families from hundreds of miles around came here, bringing their traditions and labor to help build a world in harmony with the heavens. Cahokia became a magnet of belief. Each mound, each plaza, each ritual reaffirmed that they were part of something greater, a sacred order balanced between life and death, sun and moon, earth and spirit. But not all of Cahokia's monuments were built for the living. Just south of Monk's Mound, archaeologists discovered a burial mound unlike any other. Inside were the remains of an elite figure laid upon a bed of shells arranged in the shape of a great bird, wings spread wide, talons extended. He is known as the Birdman. Around him lay offerings, thousands of shell beads, copper ornaments and weapons. Nearby were the graves of others, attendants, sacrifices, or companions whose fate was bound to his. To the people of Cahokia, this was not death. It was transformation, the moment when a leader became one with the divine. The Birdman symbol appears again and again in Mississippian art, half man, half hawk, straddling the worlds of earth and sky. It represented power, flight, and rebirth, the eternal cycle that governed both nature and society. For centuries, Cahokia thrived. Its fields of maize stretched to the horizon. Smoke from cooking fires rose in soft spirals over the floodplain. Boats carried trade goods up and down the river network. The city was alive with color, painted temples, bright fabrics, shimmering copper. From the terrace of Monk's Mound, a chief could look out over miles of farmland, villages and mounds, seeing a civilization that believed itself eternal. And yet, within just a few generations, everything began to change. The same river that had given life also brought destruction. Floods became more frequent, storms more severe. Fields that once yielded abundance turned to mud. As the population swelled, the surrounding forests were stripped for firewood and construction. Soil eroded, game grew scarce, and tempers rose. Archaeological evidence shows signs of walls, wooden palisades built around the central city. Cahokia was fortifying itself, but at the height of its power, around the year 1200 CE, the city still dazzled travelers. Foreign traders brought goods from across the continent. The plazas still filled with dancers and musicians. And when the sun rose over Woodhenge, its light still touched the face of Monk's Mound exactly as it had generations before. For a while, the system held, but balance is fragile. By the 1300s, the people of Cahokia began to leave. One by one, neighborhoods emptied. Fires were left unlit. The great plaza grew quiet, and within a few decades, the once mighty city had vanished. No one knows exactly why. Climate change, resource depletion, internal conflict or disease, all may have played a part. Perhaps the spiritual promise that had built the city could no longer sustain it. Without unity, the center collapsed. By the time Europeans arrived centuries later, the mounds were overgrown and silent. Local native tribes spoke of ancient builders, but their names were forgotten. To settlers, the mounds were mysteries, relics of an unknown past. Only in the last 100 years did archaeologists begin to uncover the truth. That before the birth of the United States, before Columbus, before written history on this continent, there was a city here, complex, organized, and magnificent. Cahokia stands as proof that civilization in North America was not born with European arrival. It thrived here long before, guided by its own sciences, faith, and art. The people of Cahokia built a city aligned with the cosmos, governed by ceremony and sustained by belief. They measured time by the sun and marked eternity with earth. Their legacy still rises above the fields of Illinois, hidden beneath grass and sky. Today, the mounds remain, quiet, green, enduring. They are reminders that America's first city was not a colony but a creation, a homegrown civilization that reached for the stars and then slipped into silence. When you stand atop Monk's Mound and feel the wind sweep across the plain, you can almost hear the echoes, the drums, the voices, the games, the songs of a people who built a world, watched it flourish, and then walked away. Cahokia may have vanished, but its story endures, written not on paper, but in the soil beneath our feet. A city that proved that even without iron or empire, the human spirit can shape the world. A city that reminds us that greatness can rise, shine, and disappear, yet still whisper through time. This was Cahokia, the city that vanished overnight, yet never truly died. Life inside the mounds, the beating heart of ancient America. Morning sunlight spills over the flatlands of the Mississippi Valley. Mist lifts from the wetlands, and the echoes of drums roll through the air. 1,000 fires smoke across the floodplain. This is Cahokia, awake, alive, and overflowing with energy. The city hums long before dawn. Farmers cross the fields with woven baskets on their backs. Children chase each other between the houses. Craftsmen hammer copper, carve shells, and smooth the edges of clay bowls still warm from the kiln. The scent of maize porridge, roasted squash, and fresh river fish fills the air. This is a city built not only of earth and belief, but of daily life, of rhythm, repetition, and hope. It is the living pulse of a civilization in full bloom. Cahokia in the 12th century was a marvel of organization. From above, it was laid out like a sacred grid, the central mound at its heart, surrounded by districts of homes, workshops, and fields. At the center stood Monk's Mound, the sacred pyramid that touched the sky. Around it stretched the grand plaza, where ceremonies unfolded, markets thrived, and stories were told in the language of song and smoke. The homes of ordinary people were simple but well built. Wooden posts formed the walls, packed with clay and thatch to keep out the wind. Each house stood near others, forming tight-knit neighborhoods connected by footpaths. Most families grew their own food: maize, beans, squash, and sunflower, the staples of survival and ritual alike. Nearby, communal fields stretched for miles, their edges fading into forests filled with deer, turkey, and wild berries. Life in Cahokia followed the rhythm of the seasons. Spring was for planting and renewal. Summer brought festivals and trade. Autumn was for harvest and thanksgiving. Winter, a time of storytelling, reflection, and rest. This cycle, repeated year after year, bound the people to the land just as surely as their mounds bound them to the heavens. Cahokia's people were not simply farmers. They were builders, astronomers, and artists. Their society valued precision, beauty, and meaning. Each mound had a purpose. Some held temples or elite homes, others served as platforms for ceremonies, while smaller ones marked burials or honored ancestors. Taken together, they formed a sacred landscape, a map of the cosmos laid across the earth. The people here believed the universe was made of 3 worlds: the upper world of the sky, home of the sun, moon, and divine spirits; the middle world, the world of humans, the land of life and struggle; and the lower world, beneath the rivers and soil, where ancestors and powerful forces of water and renewal resided. The mounds acted as bridges between these realms. a way for people to reach upward toward the divine and downward toward the spirits of the earth. In the center of the city, smoke rises from cooking fires. Markets open. Traders arrive from distant lands, some from as far as the Gulf Coast or the Great Lakes. They bring copper, shell, obsidian, and exotic stones. Others carry finely crafted pottery, woven cloth, or sacred pigments used for ceremonies. Cahokia sits at the heart of this vast trade web, connected by river and by faith. On any given day, the Grand Plaza becomes a sea of movement. Merchants call out their goods. Musicians play flutes and drums. Children watch as storytellers perform legends of creation, tales of great birds, floods, and heroes who tamed the forces of nature. Each word carries a lesson, a reminder that the balance of the world depends on harmony between people and the land. The people of Cahokia were bound by a shared belief in cosmic order. Every sunrise, every season, every ceremony reinforced the same truth: that life was a cycle, rising, flourishing, and fading like the sun itself. Even work carried sacred meaning. To plant maize was not just to feed the body, but to honor the earth. To build a mound was not just to raise soil, but to lift the spirit closer to the divine. At the edge of the city stands Woodhenge, the circle of cedar posts that measures time. Here, priests watch the horizon for signs of the sun's movement. On the morning of the summer solstice, crowds gather before dawn. As the first rays of light break the horizon, they align perfectly between two posts. Gasps ripple through the crowd. The high priest raises his arms, painted in red and white, the colors of life and balance. The drums begin to beat. The people cheer, dance, and thank the spirits for another turning of the year. Time itself is celebrated as sacred, the heartbeat of the world, renewed once again. Inside the homes, women grind maize into flour using heavy stone tools. Men shape chert blades and copper ornaments. Children carry water, chase dogs, and learn the small rituals of daily life. Elders tell stories by firelight, stories of floods, creation, and heroes who transformed into birds or stars. Every family has a role. Every role sustains the city. Cahokia's population may have reached 20,000, but its success depended on unity. Every person contributed. Some built the mounds, others prepared food for the workers. Some wove clothing, while others created the tools that fed the builders' hands. Together, they turned the muddy floodplain into a masterpiece of faith and engineering. But Cahokia was not without hierarchy. At the top stood the ruling elite, the chiefs and priests, believed to be the chosen messengers between humans and gods. Their word was law, but also prayer. They lived on elevated mounds above the commoners, symbolizing their closeness to the heavens. When they appeared in public, they wore cloaks of feathers and necklaces of copper and shell. They led rituals, settled disputes, and oversaw the great feasts that united thousands. Beneath them were skilled workers, the artisans, farmers, and builders who made the city function. Their work was vital, their craftsmanship remarkable. Pottery found in Cahokia is decorated with intricate spirals, animals, and cosmic symbols. Every bowl and jar told a story of water, fire, earth, and sky. Even the smallest object was made with reverence. As evening falls, the city transforms. Fires glow from hundreds of homes. Smoke drifts upward like prayers. Families gather to eat. The air fills with laughter and the soft beat of distant drums. In the Grand Plaza, young men prepare for the sacred game of chunky. The stone disc rolls across the flat ground, spinning like a comet. Spears fly after it. The crowd cheers. To outsiders, it might look like sport. But for Cahokians, it's much more. It's a ritual of balance, a way to honor fate, courage, and destiny. Some play for pride, others for offerings or alliances. In the crowd, dancers in painted masks whirl and stomp, mimicking the motion of stars across the sky. The game ends with celebration, food shared, music played, and chants that rise into the night. For these people, play and prayer are the same act. Joy itself is sacred. Beneath the city, life and death intertwine. At the edge of the central plaza lies Mound 72, a burial mound that reveals the depth of Cahokia's faith. Here, archaeologists discovered the remains of leaders laid to rest on beds of shell and copper. Some graves are surrounded by attendants, sacrificed to serve in the afterlife. Others contain offerings of beads, weapons, and symbols of birds and sun. The most famous is the Birdman burial, a figure placed on a platform of shell beads shaped like a falcon. To his people, he was the bridge between worlds, the embodiment of transformation and power. Death in Cahokia was not an ending, but a passage. To die was to join the ancestors and rise again as part of the eternal cycle. In this city, everything connected. The stars guided the priests. The river fed the fields. The people fed the city. And the city fed their faith. It was a world where boundaries blurred, between earth and sky, man and God, life and death. Even the mounds themselves were living symbols, layers of earth representing generations of memory. To climb one was to walk upon the past. To build one was to ensure the future. But beneath the harmony, subtle tensions were growing. As the population increased, food demand rose. Forests were cleared faster than they could regrow. Floods from the river became harder to control. The same soil that had nourished the city now began to erode. Resources strained, and with them, unity. Walls went up, wooden palisades surrounding the central core, perhaps for defense or perhaps for control. Even in paradise, cracks were beginning to show. Yet for now, Cahokia still thrived. At sunrise, smoke still curled over the fields. Children still laughed near the mounds. And on festival days, tens of thousands still filled the plazas to celebrate life, fertility, and the turning of the sun. As night falls again, the city sleeps. Crickets sing across the plains. The river glows under moonlight. From the top of Monk's Mound, a priest watches the horizon, eyes lifted toward the stars. Each light in the sky is an ancestor, a guide, a memory, a promise. In this quiet moment, he sees the perfection of what they have built, a city in balance with the cosmos, a world ordered by faith, labor, and love. He does not know that within a few generations, this harmony will falter, that the fires will go out, the plazas will empty, and the mounds will fall silent. But tonight, the city breathes. It is alive, whole, and magnificent. Cahokia stands not as a ruin of mystery, but as a living memory of what humanity can achieve when it believes in something greater than itself. It is the proof that greatness is not measured by stone or steel, but by vision, unity, and the courage to dream. And as the stars drift west over the river, the people of Cahokia sleep beneath their sacred mounds, unaware that they have already built a legacy that will outlast time itself. God's power and blood, the sacred laws of Cahokia. The sun rises red over the Mississippi floodplain. Its light touches the top of Monk's Mound first, the sacred pyramid where the ruler stands waiting, arms lifted toward the sky. Below him, thousands gather in the grand plaza. Drums pound, rattles shake, voices rise in chants that echo across the fields. To the people of Cahokia, this is not just mourning. It is rebirth, the world awakening again, just as it did in the time of the first creation. Cahokia was more than a city. It was a temple, a living map of the universe. Every mound, plaza, and wooden circle was part of a sacred design. Its geometry reflected the balance of the cosmos, the four directions, the path of the sun, the rhythm of life and death. At its heart stood the leader, the great sun, the chief priest, the one chosen by divine right to keep the world in order. For the people, his power was not political, it was cosmic. When he spoke, the earth listened. When he prayed, the crops grew. His duty was to maintain balance between heaven and earth, between gods and mortals. If the rains came late or the floods destroyed the fields, the blame fell upon him. Because in Cahokia, leadership was not privilege, it was sacrifice. Religion in Cahokia shaped every breath of life. It told the people when to plant, when to harvest, when to mourn, and when to celebrate. The gods were not distant. They were present in the wind, the water, the fire, and the soil. Each mound was a point of contact, a bridge where offerings crossed between worlds. The people believed in a universe made of 3 layers. Above was the upper world, the realm of the sun, the moon, and the divine spirits. Below was the lower world, a shadowy realm beneath the rivers, home of serpents, water monsters, and the ancestors. Between them lay the middle world, the human world, fragile and temporary. Cahokia's mounds rose like mountains linking these realms together. Every festival, every prayer was designed to keep those worlds in harmony. Without ritual, chaos would return. The sun would falter, the rains would stop, and life would crumble back into darkness. At the center of their faith stood the symbol of the birdman, half human, half hawk, soaring between the sky and the earth. He represented transformation, the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. The birdman was strength, speed, and the divine messenger of the sun. To live as he did was to live in balance. To die as he did was to rise again in glory. In ceremonies, chiefs and priests wore cloaks of feathers and masks shaped like falcons. Their arms spread wide as they danced, imitating flight. They painted their faces with red ochre, the color of life and blood, and white clay, the color of spirit and renewal. The people watched in awe, believing they were witnessing the gods themselves descend to earth. But the gods demanded more than prayer. They demanded sacrifice. In Cahokia, life and death were part of the same sacred current. To ensure prosperity, balance had to be maintained, sometimes through offerings of food, sometimes through offerings of blood. Animals, birds, and in rare cases, humans were given to the spirits that sustained creation. The most striking evidence of this devotion lies in Mound 72. Beneath its grassy surface, archaeologists found the remains of more than 270 people, men and women buried with ritual care, others laid in mass graves, some adorned with precious goods, others positioned in symmetrical patterns. At the center was the birdman burial, the body of an elite figure resting on a bed of shells shaped like a falcon in flight. Around him lay attendants and offerings, a human echo of the sun's rebirth each morning. This was not cruelty, it was devotion. To the Cahokians, sacrifice was the price of cosmic balance. Just as the sun gave light by burning itself, so too did humans offer what was dearest to them to keep the world alive. The priests of Cahokia were not mere servants of religion, they were scientists of the sacred. They studied the movement of stars, tracked the patterns of floods, and read meaning in the flight of birds. The circle of posts at Woodhenge was their observatory. By marking the sunrise on solstices and equinoxes, they could predict seasons, floods, and harvest cycles. Knowledge was power, and in Cahokia, that power was divine. Their ceremonies followed celestial time. The summer solstice marked fertility and abundance. The winter solstice was renewal and rebirth. Every dawn and dusk had its own prayer, every moon its own feast. To live here was to move through time as though it were sacred space. Every day a ritual, every night a return to the gods. At the top of the sacred hierarchy stood the chief priest-king, chosen not only for bloodline but for his perceived connection to the divine. He lived upon the summit of Monk's Mound, higher than any other, physically closer to the sky. When he emerged from his temple, the entire city could see him. He was light and law, the living axis between worlds. His word carried the weight of heaven. When he called for labor, thousands obeyed without question. When he declared a festival, the city filled with song. When he prayed for rain, the people bowed to the ground and waited for thunder. But the ruler's power came with a cost. He carried the burden of the universe on his shoulders. If disaster struck, if crops failed, It was believed that he had lost divine favor, and when a ruler died, his passing was marked with immense ceremony, the closing of one world and the birth of another. Imagine the great ritual days. The entire city gathers in the Grand Plaza. The air is thick with drumbeats and incense smoke. From the terraces of Monk's Mound, the priests emerge, feathers glinting in sunlight, copper ornaments flashing like fire. They move in slow, deliberate rhythm, carrying sacred bundles wrapped in deerskin. Each step is a prayer, each gesture a message to the unseen. They stop at the altar where maize, shell beads, and carved effigies are offered to the spirits. The crowd kneels in silence as the chief lifts his arms toward the sun. The moment stretches, and then, as the drums rise again, the people erupt in celebration. The ritual is complete. Balance has been restored. These ceremonies did more than honor the gods. They bound the city together. Every citizen, from the poorest farmer to the highest priest, shared the same faith, the same rhythm, the same breath. This unity was the secret of Cahokia's power. Faith was not separate from government. It was government. Religion was the architecture that held the city's soul, but even faith can fracture. In the later years of Cahokia's rise, tension began to grow. As floods worsened and resources dwindled, the people questioned their leaders. If the gods were angry, who had angered them? If the rains would not come, whose prayers had failed? The priests answered with more rituals, larger offerings, and greater sacrifices. Temples were rebuilt. Walls were strengthened. Festivals became more intense, more desperate. The people obeyed. But beneath the surface, doubt began to spread like cracks in stone. Still, Cahokia remained a place of wonder. At night, torches lit the plazas. Drummers played beneath the stars. The air shimmered with heat, sweat, and faith. In every direction, mounds rose like silent guardians. The priests looked up to the heavens, believing they could still read the will of the gods in the patterns of the stars. One could imagine standing there, on the terrace of Monk's Mound, feeling the wind off the river, hearing the chants of thousands rising like waves. In that moment, the city must have seemed eternal. The people believed they had built the center of the universe, the axis that held heaven and earth together. But no city, no matter how divine, can hold the world forever. In Cahokia's sacred order, the same power that united could also destroy. The mounds that symbolized divine connection also symbolized control. To live in balance required obedience. To question faith was to threaten the order of existence. And so the leaders ruled not by force, but by belief. Their power rested on an invisible foundation, the shared conviction that the gods were with them. As long as that belief held, the city flourished. When it faltered, the world began to tremble. Still, the people prayed. They watched the sunrise at Woodhenge, celebrated harvest under full moons, and buried their dead with songs of renewal. Every action, from planting corn to painting pottery, was part of the great cosmic dance. Theirs was not a religion of fear, but of awe, a faith that saw the divine in every blade of grass, every drop of rain, every breath of wind. To modernize, Cahokia's religion might seem distant, mysterious, or even strange. But to its people, it was everything. Science, art, law, and love intertwined. It gave meaning to life and dignity to death. It taught that humans were part of the universe, not masters of it. And though the mounds now stand silent, the faith that built them still whispers through time, a reminder that even without written words, humans have always sought to speak with the sky. Cahokia's greatness lay not in conquest or empire, but in belief. Its people built a civilization out of faith, a world where time, land, and life itself were sacred. For 3 centuries, they lived by the rhythm of the sun, built monuments of earth, and held the balance of nature and spirit in their hands. And though their gods no longer hear their songs, the earth remembers every beat of their drums, because in the end, Cahokia's religion was not about fear or domination. It was about connection to the land, to each other, and to something greater than themselves. That connection built a city that defied time, and even as its people vanished, their sacred laws remained written in the soil, eternal, unbroken, and alive. The fall of Cahokia, when the earth turned against them, the Mississippi River was never still. It twisted, flooded, and changed course, carving new paths through its valley, leaving the land rich but restless. For centuries, Cahokia thrived along its banks. The river fed the fields, carried trade, and connected distant worlds. But the same water that gave life would one day take it away. The year was around 1200 CE. Cahokia had stood for nearly a century as the heart of a vast civilization. Tens of thousands of people called it home. The plazas still filled with laughter and song. The mounds still caught the morning light. But beneath that beauty, cracks were forming, quiet, invisible, inevitable. The first signs came from the sky. Seasons shifted. Rain fell when it wasn't expected. Then it stopped altogether. The air grew dry, the river low. Crops failed. Families prayed to the sun and the water spirits, begging them to restore the balance. And just as the people began to despair, the sky answered, but not with mercy. When the rains returned, they came with fury. Storms rolled across the floodplain. The river burst its banks. Fields were swallowed, homes washed away. The fertile land that had sustained them turned to endless mud. Archaeologists studying the soil around Cahokia have found clear evidence of massive floods during this period, layers of silt that buried fields and settlements alike. It was a natural disaster on a scale few could survive. The people rebuilt. They always did. But something had changed. The floods came more often, the droughts more severe. The balance that once held their world together was breaking. Environmental stress was only part of the story. Cahokia's size had become its greatest burden. To feed so many, forests were cut for miles around. The wood that built their homes, fueled their fires, and raised their mounds began to vanish. Without trees, the soil eroded. Without soil, the harvest failed. Without harvest, the city starved. Hunters traveled farther and farther to find deer and turkey. Rivers that once teemed with fish now ran brown and shallow. The abundance that had built Cahokia's greatness was fading, replaced by scarcity and struggle. But the most dangerous force was not nature. It was fear. Fear of hunger. Fear of punishment. Fear that the gods had turned away. The priests called for more rituals. The people obeyed. Offerings grew larger. The ceremonies longer. The sacrifices more desperate. If the gods were angry, they had to be appeased, no matter the cost. At the same time, the city's leaders strengthened their grip on power. They ordered the construction of palisade walls, wooden barriers that encircled the central mounds and plazas. To outsiders, it looked like defense. To insiders, it felt like separation. The walls divided the rulers from the ruled, the sacred from the suffering. Cahokia, once a symbol of unity, was now a city of fear. In the neighborhoods beyond the walls, tension grew. Families abandoned their homes, seeking refuge in the countryside. Villages that once sent tribute to the capital stopped sending grain. Trade routes quieted. The great gatherings that had once drawn thousands grew smaller each year. The city that had been built by faith now began to fracture under doubt. Whispers spread that the priests had lost the favor of the gods, that the rulers' prayers no longer reached the heavens. Each storm that tore through the floodplain felt like an omen. Each failed crop felt like divine judgment. Archaeological evidence shows something striking in this period. Within the walls, construction continued, but on a smaller, more desperate scale. Mounds were rebuilt hastily. Woodhenge was realigned and reconstructed several times, as if the priests were trying to recapture lost order by adjusting the heavens themselves. Even their sacred calendar was shifting, like time itself had fallen out of rhythm. And then, violence. Excavations at Cahokia reveal burned houses, broken walls, and signs of sudden destruction. Some researchers believe internal conflict erupted. civil unrest, rival factions, or attacks from displaced peoples. Others suggest that food shortages drove the people to fight over what little remained. Whatever the cause, Cahokia had lost the peace that once defined it. By the 1200s, the city's population began to collapse. The outer districts emptied first, then the neighborhoods near the central plaza. Houses were abandoned, their walls collapsing under the weight of rain and time. Grass reclaimed the courtyards. The Grand Plaza fell silent. For generations, families had carried soil to build the mounds. Now the earth began to take them back, yet even as people fled, faith endured. Some stayed, clinging to the old rituals. They still lit fires on the terraces of Monk's Mound. They still prayed at sunrise and sunset. They still watched the horizon for signs that the gods would forgive them, but forgiveness never came. The final years of Cahokia are a blur of silence. Archaeology can tell us where they lived, what they built, what they ate, but not what they felt as their world unraveled. We can only imagine the sound of a mother whispering to her child that the rains will return. The priest standing on the empty mound, looking to the sky for a sign that never arrives. The families walking away from the city that once promised eternity. By 1350 CE, the heart of Cahokia was gone. The mounds remained, but the fires that had burned on their summits were cold. The plazas lay empty. The river flowed on, silent witness to what had been. Where did the people go? That too is part of the mystery. Some believe they scattered north and south, joining other Mississippian towns across the Midwest and Southeast. Others think they migrated along the river valleys, carrying fragments of their culture, their art, their stories, their gods, to new homelands. Even today, many native nations, including the Osage, Quapaw, and Choctaw, trace ancestral connections to Cahokia's people. Its spirit never vanished. It simply changed shape. Centuries later, when European explorers came to this land, they found the mounds overgrown with grass and trees. They wondered who could have built such monuments. Some refused to believe native peoples were capable of it. They invented myths of lost tribes, vanished races, even visitors from across the ocean. But the truth was simpler and far more powerful. Cahokia had been built by the ancestors of the very people Europeans found here, by farmers, artists and dreamers who shaped the land with their own hands. Their names were forgotten, but their earthworks remained, silent, patient, eternal. Today, scientists studying tree rings and sediment layers have confirmed what the ancient Cahokians already knew too well. The climate of the 13th century was chaotic, alternating floods and droughts that devastated crops across North America. The river that had once been their greatest ally became their greatest threat. The weather shifted, and the city's fragile balance broke. Yet, perhaps it was never just the earth that doomed Cahokia. Perhaps it was the weight of belief itself, the pressure of maintaining divine perfection in an imperfect world. When the rituals stopped working, faith cracked. When faith cracked, the city followed. Still, even in ruin, Cahokia never truly died. Its people carried its lessons wherever they went. They took with them the art of mound building, the stories of the birdman, the reverence for balance and the sun. From the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, echoes of Cahokia appear in later Mississippian towns, in their symbols, their ceremonies, their architecture. The city lived on in memory, scattered like seeds on the wind. Today, as the wind moves across the green hills of southern Illinois, it hums through time. You can stand atop Monk's Mound and see the modern skyline of St. Louis in the distance. Two worlds 1,000 years apart, one of steel, one of earth. The same river still flows between them. The same sun still rises over the horizon. For the people of Cahokia, the sun was life, the endless cycle of death and rebirth. Maybe in some way the city fulfilled that cycle. It rose, flourished, fell, and was reborn, not in stone, but in memory. The fall of Cahokia is a warning and a wonder. It tells us that even the greatest civilizations are fragile, not because of weakness, but because of balance. When harmony with nature is lost, power cannot save us. When belief turns to fear, greatness becomes burden. And when we forget that the earth gives and takes in equal measure, the soil itself remembers what we've done. Yet, Cahokia's story is also hope. Proof that human hands can build beauty, faith, and meaning without metal or machines. They turned dirt into eternity. They carved time into the ground. And though their voices are gone, the earth still speaks for them. If you listen closely, in the whisper of the wind over the mounds, in the rhythm of the river, in the stillness of dawn, you can still hear their message. All things rise, all things fall, but nothing truly disappears. Cahokia was not destroyed. It was transformed, returned to the earth that once gave it life, and perhaps that was the final act of balance the city ever performed. The rediscovery. How America found its lost civilization. For 600 years, the mounds of Cahokia lay silent. The forests grew over them. The rivers changed course. Generations came and went, never knowing that beneath the grass and roots lay the remains of a lost city, a city that had once rivaled the greatest of the ancient world. To travelers in the 1700s, they were simply hills, strange, symmetrical, out of place. Farmers ploughed their edges. Children climbed them for fun. Few imagined that human hands had shaped them centuries before Columbus ever saw the ocean. But the earth remembers what people forget. And one day, America began to listen. Again. The first written account of Cahokia came from French explorers in the late 1600s. They traveled up the Mississippi and found themselves surrounded by enormous earthen mounds. They asked the local tribes who had built them. The answer was simple and haunting. They were here before us. The explorers named the site after a nearby group of native people, the Cahokia tribe, though those who had built the city were long gone. By the time settlers arrived, even the memory of the builders had faded into legend. In the 1800s, as the United States expanded westward, curiosity about these mysterious mounds grew. Some believed they were burial sites. Others thought they marked ancient fortresses. A few claimed they were the work of a lost race, theories born from arrogance and ignorance, refusing to accept that indigenous people could have created something so monumental. Still, the questions persisted. Who built these mounds? When? And why had they vanished? In the late 19th century, science began to replace myth. Early archaeologists and surveyors started to map the mounds, measure their size, and dig into their layers. They found pottery, tools, shell beads, and bones, clear signs of human hands and hearts. Slowly, the truth began to emerge. Cahokia was not the work of a vanished race. It was the achievement of Native Americans, the ancestors of tribes who still live across the Midwest and the South today. By the early 1900s, excavations revealed just how vast the city had been. Monk's Mound, the largest of them all, was nearly 100 feet tall and covered more ground than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Hundreds of smaller mounds surrounded it, each with its own story. What had once seemed a landscape of natural hills became a blueprint of a lost civilization. Archaeologists found evidence of advanced urban planning, plazas aligned with the sun, neighborhoods arranged by design, and massive public works that required thousands of laborers. Cahokia, they realized, was not just a ceremonial center. It was a city, the first true city in North America. A metropolis of farmers, artists, and priests who had transformed the floodplain into a living monument. Every discovery deepened the mystery. Charred wood revealed the remains of Woodhenge, a solar observatory made of giant cedar posts. Inside the mounds, archaeologists uncovered burials, ritual offerings, and artifacts carved with intricate symbols, spirals, falcons, serpents, and suns. Each find painted a clearer picture of a society deeply connected to nature, astronomy, and faith. But the more they uncovered, the more they realized how much had been lost. No written language remained, no names, no records of kings or battles or laws. Only the earth, silent, patient, holding its secrets beneath layers of time. By the mid-20th century, Cahokia had captured the imagination of historians and scientists around the world. New technology revealed that its builders were master engineers. They had moved more than 55 million cubic feet of soil by hand, an achievement that rivaled the construction of Egypt's pyramids or the Mayan temples of Central America. And yet, unlike those civilizations, Cahokia left no stone monuments. Its people built with earth, wood, and faith, materials meant to return to nature when their time was done. It was as if they understood that everything created by human hands eventually belongs back to the soil. In 1982, Cahokia was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of the first in the United States. Today, it stands as a protected monument to a civilization that shaped this land long before the birth of America. Visitors walk its trails, climb Monk's Mound, and gaze out over the same horizon the Cahokians once saw. From the top, you can still trace the outline of their city, the Grand Plaza, the mounds, the fields beyond. It's quiet now, but not empty. Every breeze, every rustle of grass carries echoes of the past. Modern research continues to reveal new insights. Archaeologists using radar and satellite imaging have discovered the buried footprints of neighborhoods, temples, and roads that stretch for miles beyond what's visible. Cahokia wasn't just a city. It was the center of a vast region connected by trade, migration, and shared belief. From Wisconsin to Louisiana, archaeologists find Cahokian-style pottery, artwork, and symbols, proof that its influence spread across half a continent. But perhaps the most remarkable revelation is this: Cahokia was not a mysterious exception. It was part of a broader story, a chapter in the long history of Native America, where people across the continent built towns, cultivated fields, and developed complex societies guided by their own sciences and philosophies. Cahokia was proof that North America had civilizations long before colonization. Civilizations with art, astronomy, engineering, and faith as sophisticated as any on Earth. And yet, for centuries, its story was ignored, buried not only by time but by pride. Only now is the world beginning to understand the depth of what was lost. Modern native voices have begun reclaiming this history, connecting the mounds to their own traditions. The Osage Nation, whose ancestors may have walked Cahokia's plazas, call it a place where the people spoke to the sky. To them, these mounds are not ruins, they are sacred, still alive, still breathing with the spirit of those who built them. When you stand atop Monk's Mound and close your eyes, you can almost feel that truth. The wind across the grass sounds like 1,000 whispers. The ground beneath your feet feels alive, as if the city is still dreaming below. Cahokia's rediscovery changed how we understand America's past. It shattered the myth that civilization here began with European arrival. It revealed that the story of this land began long before, written in earth instead of ink, in rivers instead of roads. Every mound is a page, every artifact a word. Together, they form a language older than any alphabet, the language of creation itself. Cahokia teaches us that greatness is not measured by what survives, but by what it inspires. The people who built it are gone, but their vision still shapes how we see the world. That humans can live in harmony with nature, that the sun, the river, and the earth are not enemies to conquer, but allies to honor. That even in silence history speaks. Today, school children visit Cahokia and learn that America's story did not begin in 1776. It began here, 1,000 years ago, in a city of earth and spirit. Scientists continue to dig, to map, to study, but perhaps the most powerful discoveries are not found with shovels or machines. They're found in what Cahokia makes us feel: awe, humility, and connection. Because when you look at those green hills under the open sky, you see more than ancient mounds. You see proof that the human heart has always dreamed big, that long before skyscrapers or satellites, people here already reached for the heavens. The city that vanished overnight was never truly lost. It was waiting for us to listen, waiting for us to remember that the ground beneath our feet once carried a world built on balance, community, and wonder. Today, as the sun sets over the Mississippi, its light still touches the top of Monk's Mound just as it did 1,000 years ago. The same light that guided the priests, the farmers, and the dreamers still burns across the sky. Cahokia lives in that light, not as ruins, but as remembrance. The mounds are its heartbeat, the river its breath, and every time we look to the horizon and imagine what once was, we keep its spirit alive. Cahokia was not the beginning of America's story. It is America's first chapter, the one we almost forgot, but can never again ignore.